Dr. Marshall Shepard. I am the Regents and Georgia Athletic Association Distinguished Professor of Atmospheric Sciences and Geography and the Director of the University of Georgia Atmospheric Sciences Program. I also serve as Associate Dean for Research, Scholarship, and Partnerships in the Franklin College of Arts and Sciences. When we think about the extreme heat that we're seeing today in 2026 and much of the early part of the year, I describe it as a triple whammy. Of course, we have natural weather variability. It's summer. It's supposed to be hot. People often tell me that. But what we're seeing is extreme heat domes, these massive areas of high pressure in the atmosphere. These heat domes tend to be associated with sustained periods of heat and drought, and they can lead to things like wildfires, as we've seen, for example, up in the northern plains and into Canada. We saw episodes of extreme smoke into the northeastern and midwestern US in earlier parts of the year. So these heat domes are a part of the larger weather variability that we see. But there's something else going on. We are in the midst of a strengthening El Nino. What is El Nino? El Nino is when the waters of the eastern Pacific, Central Pacific warm. They're warmer than normal. And that warming water actually changes our jet stream patterns and leads to warmer conditions on average as well. We tend to see during El Nino years, we tend to see warmer conditions than we do neutral or La Nina years. La Nina is the colder than normal waters in the Pacific. So you've got this weather variability and extreme heat waves. You've got El Nino, which tends to change weather patterns in such a way that it actually does give a boost to temperatures. In fact, we saw for the month of July, the warmest July on record here in the US. And that's just phenomenal. And then the third thing that we can't ignore is climate change. We know that climate is changing. There's an anthropogenic or human signature on top of the naturally varying climate system. And so I've written reports for the National Academies. A recent report came out in 2026 on what we call weather attribution, this idea that DNA of climate change is in today's weather. And one of the strongest signals of that is that the increased frequency intensity of heat waves. So those heat domes that I mentioned earlier and that El Nino they're sort of sitting within the midst of this background warming, if you will. And so that's the triple whammy. And then there's really a fourth whammy too if you live in a city, the urban heat island. So if we're in Atlanta or London or places that have a lot of asphalt, not as many trees, there's also this background warming associated with the urban heat island. So when we think about climate change, there are three major buckets of solutions, if you will. There's mitigation. We've got to reduce the amount of carbon emissions. That's kind of getting at the source of climate change. The second big bucket is adaptation. Certain things are going to happen, so we need to adapt in some way to withstand or be resilient to those changes. And then the sort of third area is this area of climate intervention or geoengineering, where you put up space mirrors or try to reduce the amount of sun's energy coming in using sort of dust or aerosols. I'm not ready to go there yet with those types of things, but certainly we need to understand them. So let's look at Europe this year, 2026. Parts of Spain and France and United Kingdom and so forth, dealing with temperatures that I don't think they foresaw having to deal with if it was just a naturally varying climate. As you well know, because you're in the international business, many of the homes and businesses there don't have air conditioning. And so part of the reason is that the climate probably never really expected to see 100-degree plus temperatures. Now, I know they speak in Celsius over there, but I'm talking to you from Georgia where we speak Fahrenheit. But they certainly never expected to see the types of temperatures. So that is a significant potential area of adaptive need as we see this new climate system emerging, retrofitting many of the buildings there with air conditioning. One of the things that's really disturbing to me about Europe right now as well is that many of their rivers are drying up as well. They've got low flows in many of the major rivers. Now, some of that happens due to natural variability, but the extreme drought and heat is certainly a factor this year as well. The Mediterranean Sea is really warm right now as well, and has been. The temperature is anomalous and so forth. So all of those conditions sort of exacerbate sort of the extreme heat that we've seen. Now, even within this extreme heat and extreme drought, occasionally we can also see extreme rainfall events too, because as we warm the atmosphere, there's more water vapor available to these rainstorms or medicanes, which is a type of cyclone that we see in the Mediterranean Sea and so forth. So I think that there are some tried and true adaptive measures, particularly in cities. We know that greening, using strategic vegetation and greening in cities can reduce heat, particularly along the urban heat island lines. Higher albedo cool surfaces, those that are more reflective, cool roofs, greenscaping, even things like perhaps high density development, mixed use development, which can limit sprawl. Those are important. I think one of the things that we know from work here in the States, and I think in Europe and across Asia and other parts of the world as well, transportation, buildings costs, agriculture, these are carbon intensive. And so kind of going back to the mitigation side of the house for a moment, we've been involved in something called Drawdown Georgia, which was an extension of the Project Drawdown, where we know the sort of large suite of solutions needed to reduce carbon emissions. So we're going to need a bucket of both mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies. One of the things in these conversations, we can take the future tense out. I mean, we are experiencing and being impacted by climate change now, and it will just continue to sort of continue. So it's certainly a here and now thing. Georgians, Atlantans, rural Georgians, coastal Georgians, mountain Georgia, we are all experiencing the DNA of climate change right now. I mean, I've done studies on this with some of my graduate students over the years, looking at how Georgia's climate vulnerability has increased in recent decades, particularly in the urban areas. We see increased urban heat. We're seeing increased flooding because the rain rates. More rain is falling out of a storm in a short period of time. Now, when you look at the overall annual rain totals in Georgia or Atlanta, you might not see a trend. But when you look at the rain intensities, how fast it's raining, that's something that's a hallmark of climate change, what we call an accelerated water cycle. More water's falling out of the average rainstorm in the top 1% to 2% event. So we saw that earlier this spring in Atlanta, the downtown connector, a major corridor right through the city of Atlanta. We were in the midst of a really extreme drought, but you still can get these afternoon thunderstorms, which we were expecting that day. And 2 to 3 inches of rain fell in an hour out of those storms. That's going to overwhelm drainage systems, stormwater removal, and so forth. And then you've got all of this imperviousness, this impervious surface that it just hits the ground, doesn't seep in, it runs off faster into streams, rivers, and creeks. So from an adaptive strategy standpoint, so we know that we're vulnerable to heat here in Atlanta and in the Georgia, extreme rainfall events, and then our agricultural regions are experiencing more variability and intensity of drought as well, our food supply, right? So from an urban standpoint in Atlanta, the city of Atlanta we're working with them actually and through a partnership with the city of Atlanta and a nonprofit organization called The Ray, looking at cool pavements, the potential of cooling cities. I know the city of Atlanta and my good friends over there, people like Chandra Farley and so forth, and the sustainability office are thinking about ways to mitigate with cooling, strategic tree planting and so forth. I've volunteered myself with an organization called Trees Atlanta in the past. So, but then thinking about sort of the advances, things like, going forward, permeable pavements. I served for a couple of years on the Gwinnett County, which is a suburb of Atlanta, on their sustainability commission. And we saw a demonstration at one of the county facilities on paved surfaces where the water just infiltrates right through the pavement. And so I think we have to start looking at those types of things down in rural Georgia. We've got to be more sensitive to sort of the types of impacts to agriculture there. And oh, by the way, I haven't even mentioned the impact to Georgia of hurricanes now, Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Michael, two massive storms that we used to think of hurricanes as coastal threats. But Helene and Michael came well inland into Georgia and destroyed much of our agricultural and timber crop. We're going to need to develop infrastructure in coastal, rural, and urban spaces like Atlanta that are climate resilient. And the University of Georgia and Pew Trust actually a couple of months ago released a resiliency plan for Georgia based on some of the extreme weather we're seeing.